Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. The end of the year is always a good time to reminisce about everything that happened over the past 525,600 minutes, and truly remember all the weird and wacky stuff that this year had in store. And if you follow soccer, then you probably remember this moment right here that took place at the start of the year, all the way back in January at the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations, which was called the 2021 tournament, even though it took place in 2022, much like the 2020 Summer Olympics took place in 2021. For those who don't know what happened in this game, here's a brief recap, because it truly is insane. This entire tournament was a debacle and was a chaotic mess, including a stadium being so bad that they stopped holding games there in the middle of the tournament, one country having their wrong national anthem being played, and 8 Cameroon fans dying and 50 more getting injured in a stampede right outside the stadium. However, in a tournament full of disasters and tragedies, this felt like the moment that drew the most publicity. In the first match of Group F, Tunisia played Mali, and with Mali leading the game 1-0, the referee, a Zambian ref by the name of Jenny Sikazwe, blew the final whistle in the 89th minute, which is a problem, seeing as soccer games take 90 minutes to play, and this doesn't even include stoppage time, which would have been quite substantial, seeing as there were 9 substitutions and other stoppages for video review. In other words, the game ended early, and before time was really up. Naturally, Tunisian players were furious about this, and they filed a protest, as the game drew worldwide attention for how shambolic the refereeing was. And the idea that the referee, in what is essentially a game to determine a spot in the playoffs, considering how short the group stage is, can blow the whistle early and not play out the full duration of it, seems absolutely absurd, right? You can't stop a game, especially a close game, before it's over. There's a reason that in High School Musical 3, Troy Bolin starts off by singing that his East High Wildcats have 16 minutes left to get it done, and that it wasn't 14 minutes and change before the referee just decides to end the game whenever he feels like it, and we're really just estimating. It also doesn't flow as well. Surely, there's no way that anything like this could ever happen in the NFL, especially to determine a playoff spot, right? Well, in the 1968 regular season finale between the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears, in a game to decide the Central Division title, that's exactly what happened. It's a refereeing controversy that, amazingly enough, has been forgotten more than half a century later, even though it seems unfathomable. But we're going to take a deep dive into that today, because this is the story behind the highly controversial ending to the 1968 NFL season. Before I talk about the ending in question, we need some context to understand the importance of this game, as well as how the game in question was going. Because it would be one thing if this was a completely meaningless regular season game that may have mattered to bettors and for draft positioning and pride. And it would be one thing if the referee called the game early, but that game was a 45-point blowout. However, as you're about to find out, it was neither one of those things. Far from it, in fact. It's December 15th, 1968. It's the final week, and the final day for that matter, of the NFL season. And we have 2 absolutely big games on our hands that the entire country has their eyes on. Back in 1968, only the 4 division winners made it to the playoffs. There were no wild cards, so it was win or go home. And in 3 of those divisions, there was nothing to play for entering the final day. The Dallas Cowboys had clinched the Capital Division, the Cleveland Browns had clinched the Century Division, and the Baltimore Colts had clinched the Coastal Division. As a side note, if you want to learn more about those divisions and how they each got their rather unconventional names, particularly the Century Division, click the card in the upper right corner. But while 3 of the playoff spots were decided, there were still 2 that were not, and they involved the teams that you've been watching this whole time: the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears in the Central Division. Entering the final week of the season, the Bears and Vikings were tied atop the Central with identical 7-6 records. As things stood, because the Bears won both head-to-head meetings against the Vikings, beating them 27-17 in Week 3 and 26-24 in Week 7, this meant that the Bears owned the tiebreaker. For the Vikings to make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, they needed two things to go their way. Number one, they had to beat the Philadelphia Eagles on the road. And number two, the Chicago Bears had to lose their game at home at Wrigley Field against the Green Bay Packers. If both of those things happened, then the Vikings would be playing playoff football for the first time ever. Little did anyone know that both games would be marred in controversy. Let's start with the Vikings game, because the Vikings were able to take care of business against arguably the worst team in the NFL, as they went on the road to Philadelphia and defeated the Eagles by a final score of 24-17. Now, by no means was it easy. The game was tied at the half, and Minnesota only led it by 4 points late in the fourth quarter, despite being 12-point favorites. But a win is a win, and thanks to a great game by quarterback Joe Kapp, who completed 70% of his passes, threw 2 touchdowns while running for 1, and posted a passer rating of 152.1, just 6 points shy of a perfect passer rating, the Vikings were able to hold up their end of the bargain. Of course, I say that this game was marred in controversy because of what happened at halftime, when Eagle fans infamously threw snowballs at Santa Claus, which I talked about in a previous video of mine. So if you want to learn more about that game and that incident, click the card in the upper right corner. But based on what the Vikings did on the field, 50% of the job was done. And that made this game, and the main game in our story, all the more important. Because now, the pressure was squarely on the Bears to beat the Packers, and beat their most hated rival ever. The stakes at this point were simple. If the Bears won, then first-year head coach Jim Dooley will have guided them to the playoffs, and their team's first division title since 1963, when they finished the season by winning the NFL championship. If the Bears lost, then the Vikings would be moving on, and the Bears would be watching the playoffs and would be spending Christmas at home. But the odds that the Bears were going to lose this game on their home field were pretty slim. This was a Green Bay team that was pretty bad, having lost its last 2 games and having lost 4 of its last 6 games dating back to the midway point of the season. When the two teams met in Green Bay, Chicago won that one 13-10, snapping a 4-game losing streak in Green Bay. And the Packers entered this game with nothing to play for and in disarray. Not only were they 5-7-1, firmly out of the playoff picture and having a massive letdown year after winning 3 straight titles, and not only was starting quarterback Bart Starr injured, but their backup quarterback, Zeke Brakowski, got knocked out of this game after just 2 passing attempts with bruised ribs. This meant that the Packers were down to their 3rd-string quarterback for this game, Don Horn, who hadn't thrown a single pass all season and wasn't even on the roster 10 days before because he was in the Army. Seriously, this man was not even 2 weeks removed from being in the Army. As Horn said, "I was supposed to go into service in February or March for 6 months, but the Department of the Army nixed all reservists. They said they needed all the slots for draftees. Later on, after all the draftees had been absorbed, they began to call up reservists again, and they called me in July. That's why he missed the entire season, pretty much." So you have the Bears, at home, going up against a 3rd-string quarterback who hadn't thrown a football in months, on a team who had nothing to play for outside of pride. There's no way that they lose this game, right? Well, not quite. Because in a stunning result, and I truly mean stunning, with 2 minutes left in the game, the Packers were leading at 28-27. However, Chicago was trying furiously to mount a comeback, as even though they were down 28-10 after 3 quarters, they weren't giving up, as following an 8-yard touchdown run by Ronnie Bull, a 26-yard field goal by Mac Percival, and a 51-yard touchdown pass by Jack Cannon to Dick Gordon, it was now just a 1-point game. One more score, and the Bears win it. But it was too little too late, as on 4th and 14, instead of trying a 55-yard field goal due to heavy winds not in their favor, they opted to go for it near midfield, with head coach Jim Dooley saying, "If the wind had been blowing the other way, even a little bit, I'd have let Percival try it. And when they went for it on 4th down, as you can see on this play, it didn't work out, as the pass was picked off. Now, all the Packers had to do was run out the clock. Just give it to their 3rd-string quarterback, have him hand the ball off or fall forward, since the victory formation as we knew it did not exist whatsoever back then, and that's the ball game. Still a shot for the Bears to make a play, since it was by no means a formality like today on kneel downs. But for the most part, the Packers have this game wrapped up. Except, the Packers didn't even need to do that, because the referee decided, for some reason, and with no explanation whatsoever, to end the game early. That's right. Before the clock hit triple zeros, and before all 60 minutes were played, the final gun went off, and the game was over. The Bears did not have 60 minutes to win this one. It was more like 59 minutes and 49 seconds. Here's what happened, and keep in mind that there is no surviving footage of this whatsoever, partially because you're not seeing any full broadcasts of games from the 1960s. And even though NFL Films put together extended highlights and game recaps for games like this, they would never showcase a blown call back then at this magnitude, although there are multiple newspaper accounts of this happening. With roughly 11 seconds left, the Packers had to call a play. The play clock was winding down, and the Bears had no timeouts. So if the Packers could just hold on to the ball for this one play, they would win. So this was now or never for the Bears. One play to save their season. Anything you can do to get this ball back and give your team a chance for a quick out pass and a long field goal, or a Hail Mary, you do it. You try and time the snap count as best as you possibly can. And with that, the legendary middle linebacker Dick Butkus tried to time the snap count. The bad news was that he couldn't do it, as he went offside and made contact with one of the offensive linemen. Now this should be a 5-yard penalty, and that's it. However, the referee not only issued a 5-yard penalty, but kept the clock running for some reason, even though it's supposed to stop regardless of whether or not Butkus did this on accident or on purpose. In other words, the referee did not know the rules. And this meant that instead of having one final chance to steal the ball back near midfield, the referee just blew the final gun, even though there were still 11 seconds left on the clock. And oh man, there was outrage over this one, and understandably so. To lose the game is one thing, but to lose partially because the referee decided to stop the game early is another thing entirely. And it should be noted, there's nothing that says that if the final 11 or so seconds of the game were played, that the result would be any different. The Bears put themselves in this awful situation to begin with. A lot had to happen, obviously, for the Bears to come back. They needed to force a turnover when they only forced one all day, and when the Packers are going to have two hands on the ball at all times. Then, they needed to get the Hail Mary to go, or they needed to get about 10 yards to the sideline before lining up for a long field goal in 19-mile-per-hour winds with a wind chill of 7 degrees. It's not impossible. It's not like they're complaining about not having this opportunity down by 24. But it's not likely. But still, you can't blow a game early before it's finished. You just can't. There's a reason that the game is 60 minutes. And former first-round pick defensive end Lloyd Phillips, in his second season, voiced his frustrations, saying, "When Butkus made contact, they ruled he did it on purpose. But that doesn't matter, because the clock is supposed to stop anyway. You like to play it out. Besides, the guy playing across from me had just given me a whack in the stomach, and I wanted another play to get back at him." But just like that, their season was over, and there was nothing they could do about it. The Vikings were in the playoffs, and it was at least partially because a referee either had no idea how to read a clock or didn't care. I wish I could say that was the only controversy involving a referee in a Chicago pro sports game on December 15th, 1968. But considering the fact that the Blackhawks had a lineman who was supposed to show up for their game against the Oakland Seals that day in the NHL, and he just didn't show, it was not a great day to be an official in the Windy City. I'll put it that way. The 1968 season was not one without controversy across pro football. From the Heidi game, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, to a fiasco between the Rams and the Bears 1 week before, where the Rams were only given 3 downs instead of 4, to another broadcasting controversy involving NBC, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Houston Oilers, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And this was right up there with them all, even if it's been somewhat forgotten throughout NFL history. They say that in football, you need to play all 60 minutes, because the game's not over until the clock hits triple zeros. But at least on this day in 1968, with the Central Division on the line, and with the outcome of the game hanging in the balance, that couldn't be further from the truth. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.